In today's world, when you buy a tech product, you're not just buying a product, it can be installing an access point. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, if you've been living a life of blissful ignorance, I'm going to burst your bubble. Adversarial governments like the Chinese Communist Party have both the capability and the intent to exploit commercial technology as an intelligence collection vector. Now, when the US government buys a router, for example, or installs software, embeds a chip, or allows an app into a device, it may be unintentionally introducing something nasty into our federal networks, or our weapon systems, or our logistics platforms, and sensitive data environments. Now, the Greeks did this back in the day with a fake horse, and the Trojans could have really used Part 40, which is basically the part that says, yeah, we're gonna check that horse before it comes in. Welcome to the RFO in 5 minutes. This time, we discuss the brand spanking new Part 40. Now, Part 40 is broad. It's the procedures for safeguarding information and managing supply chain security when you buy information and communications technology, or ICT. First, let's talk supply chain risk. Here's the bottom line up front. For supply chain risk, as the world becomes more software-centric, more and more tangible items can be hacked. Vacuum cleaners, nanny cams, cranes at submarine ports, Hank Schrader's picture frame, all susceptible to hacking. Supply chain risk means the risk that someone may sabotage or maliciously introduce unwanted functionality or extract data or otherwise manipulate the purchased material in order to spy on us or manipulate its function, use, or operation. And in subpart 40.1, there's a directive that the agency executives must share relevant supply chain risk information with the Federal Acquisition Security Council, or FASC, when there's a reasonable basis to conclude that a substantial supply chain risk exists. Translation: when your organization learns something real about risk, it has to move upward and outward, not stay trapped in one program's inbox. Then Part 40 gets very practical in the place everyone feels, the prohibitions. Subpart 40.2 is where the FAR consolidates the patchwork of statutory bans and exclusions that used to be all over the FAR. The government is prohibited from contracting with contractors that use or operate certain products or services covered by these prohibitions. And two clauses you'll see are tied to this. They're very big clauses, 52.240-90 and 52.240-91. This is the part that captures a lot of names that you'll probably recognize. TikTok, or ByteDance, and Kaspersky Lab. TikTok is prohibited in the federal environment because it's a mass data collection platform, but it's also tied to a company under a legal regime that can compel cooperation and access, meaning that even if an app looks like harmless entertainment, it could be attached to a sensor that's capturing everything about your use and about what you're doing, including users, networks, and patterns. Sneaky. Kaspersky Lab is a massive Russian cybersecurity software company. It provides the kind of tool that, by design, sits deep in the system with elevated privileges. And when that kind of tool is subject to foreign influence or foreign intelligence pressure, it becomes the perfect trusted path to observe, extract, or manipulate. Think about Cypher and the Matrix. He was part of the crew, he was trusted with access to the ship's systems, and then he used that trust, which allowed him to secretly work with the enemy and compromise everything from the inside. Kaspersky Lab is basically the Cypher of US government contracting. Subpart 40.2 also captures the broader telecommunications and video surveillance equipment prohibitions. Think prohibitions against companies like Huawei, ZTE. It also brings in government exclusion orders under the Federal Acquisition Supply Chain Security Act, meaning there can be FASC-driven do not buy or use determinations. These are called orders across the government. And the program and contracting teams must identify these applicable orders. Civilian agencies are subject to DHS FASC orders, and DoD is subject to DoD FASC orders. It also folds in Office of Foreign Assets Control restrictions, including prohibitions tied to places like Sudan and Iran. The point of the acquisitions can't accidentally become a funding channel, a supply channel, or a support channel for sanctioned regimes or prohibited sources, even indirectly through subcontractors or embedded tech. These regimes in Sudan and Iran are sanctioned for doing some pretty bad stuff. Bottom line for the CO, you and the PM have to ensure that proposals don't include violations, that contractors must disclose violations under the clause. Now, all this may seem overwhelming for COs. You may be watching this and thinking, this isn't my job to know all the prohibitions and sanctions and companies I can't work with and look deep into every supply chain or hidden bad things. And you're right, it's not your job. But it is your job to find the person whose job it is to know this stuff, which is why the companion guidance for Part 40 makes a huge deal in making sure the right security professionals are part of the team from the get-go. This is going to be one of those rely on your experts kind of deals. Finally, subpart 40.3 is where Part 40 ties the whole thing back to the most obvious mission consequence, information compromise. This subpart pulls together procedures for safeguarding classified information and safeguarding what's called federal contract information, or FCI, and methods to do so. Now, FCI is essentially information the government provides to a contractor or information generated for the government under a contract that isn't meant for public release. It's not necessarily classified, but it is still government information that's not open for public release and therefore must be protected from exposure. And the exposure could harm operations and mission effectiveness. If classified information may be involved, the contracting officer has to recognize that early and put the right safeguards in place. In the DoD world, maybe we're thinking of using the DD Form 254. Also in the DoD world, when we're thinking about FCI, this is where CMMC comes into play. So know about that if you're working for the Department of War. At its core, Part 40 is about preventing mission systems from being quietly exposed through the things that we buy and the systems we allow to touch government data. Security has to be integrated across the whole lifecycle. During market research, figure out where components come from, what access a product really has. And the solicitation, require offers to demonstrate security and supply chain risk mitigation. Why not? At award, consider supply chain risk as maybe a part of responsibility determinations. Post-award, monitor and verify with real checks like testing, reviews, or sampling. And at closeout, capture what you learn so that the next buy can be smarter. This is all captured in the companion guide, by the way. When Part 40 is done right, it actually doesn't slow the mission down, but it rather keeps the mission from being undermined by the very tools that we bought to support it. But you know one channel that is always safe and secure? That's right, ASI Education. So join us next time for more RFO and 5 minutes goodness, and stay safe.